Emma Cumberland, and I'm the Creative Arts and Therapeutic Play practitioner based at Earlham Primary. This video is all about how to actually find ways to have conversations with children that really help them make sense of what's going on and really helping them to feel secure and safe. Make sure that you've watched the Understanding Trauma and the Stress Response video before watching this one, because it will give you the background of what you need to know about how a child is feeling and how we can help them change what's going on in their bodies and their minds through the ways that we talk to them. Now, we know that the most healing thing for children is us, our relationships that we can build with them. The way that we respond to children, the way that we approach things, the way that we deal with difficult behaviour is so important to helping them calm, to regulate them and bring them back into their window of tolerance, to help them begin to make sense of what has happened, to help them bring the words and the stories that they need to their feelings, which is going to help their hippocampus deep in their brain to start to make sense of everything and store it away as a memory, rather than our children just keep on going over and over the same traumatic, stressful response. Our children are going to need to really develop a trusting relationship with us. So for a lot of our children, they're coming back to the same class teacher, but everything else is completely different. So even though you may have had a trusting relationship prior to lockdown, it might still take a little bit more time for them to feel more secure because everything around it has changed. But it almost means that you are the linchpin. You're the thing that is holding it all together. We know that our relationships with children can start to heal the damage caused in their brains and their bodies through toxic stress that they've been experiencing. So we have a real opportunity to not only help our children through the lockdown, through coming back to school, but for the children that have experienced previous traumas, the way that we communicate with them can really help the long-term impacts to help them heal and to help them meet their full potential. The objectives of this video are to re-familiarise ourselves with good practice when it comes to communicating with children, which can easily be forgotten. We'll take a look at the differences between active listening, reflective listening and empathetic listening. We'll get a basic understanding of big empathy drawings and how to use them with children. We'll look at the P.A.C.E model by Dr. Dan Hughes and how we can use this approach to really increase our children's ability to express themselves and to regulate them. And finally, we'll be touching on how just changing our approach and using P.A.C.E and using empathetic listening can really make a difference to our children at this moment in time. We have so many opportunities to communicate with our children through the whole day, from the moment they come into school to the moment they go home. Now, it is important to timetable and schedule different circle times, group times and one-on-ones to help our children, but do make the most of all the other opportunities you have throughout the day when you're transitioning from activity to activity, when you are going into the playground, when you're waiting in the corridor. All these are really prime, casual times to have conversations with children and to really build a deeper connection. So let's just run over the basics. These are kind of good practice, but sometimes it's very easy to forget them, particularly when we ourselves are stressed and things are going to be very different when we go back to school. It's very likely that we'll see much more hyper-aroused children who are going to present a challenge, and we're going to need our patience. We're going to need to remember these basics so that it's something that just happens and we don't forget about them. If you do need to deal with an issue with a child, please do it in private. Take them to a more quieter corner of the classroom. A public display and a public dealing with a sensitive issue can actually cause a huge amount of humiliation and shame to a child that is traumatized. a lot of our children who have experienced previous traumas, etc., will already have this internal sense of shame and guilt that is so deep it's toxic. It's referred to as toxic guilt and toxic shame. They internalize every bad thing that has ever happened to them as happening to them because they are bad. It's the only way that a child can make sense of really traumatic events. So when we cause them to feel more humiliation and shame, they're going to connect on a deeper level to that toxic shame, and it's just reinforcing the narrative that they have. And it's almost like they'll do anything to make their world make sense by creating that damaging narrative. So the more that we humiliate and shame them, it's like we're setting them on a path to self-destruct. I'm not suggesting that anyone is intending to humiliate or shame a child by any means, but when we do it in a public display, when we call their parent to the door and we talk about their misbehaviours or that they've had a very difficult day or a bad day, we're doing it in front of all the other parents, it's really compounding that shame and that sense of guilt that they feel. So taking a child off somewhere private to a quieter corner and making it about you and them. How we position ourselves is really important. So do remember to make yourself lower so that you're not a dominant figure. So you can get down on one knee, you can crouch down, you can sit on a chair. But if you're going to have a meaningful conversation with a child to bring them back into their window of tolerance, to help them begin to calm and regulate, you need to not be domineering. So making that body smaller and lower is the first really important thing to do. Making sure that you yourself are calm. So take some deep breaths before you need to go into this interaction to make sure that you are calm. Be the calm that you want to see in that child. So facial expression neutral, making sure your muscles are relaxed. Make sure your body language is open, and by that I mean we're not crossing our arms over our chests. If anything, make the display conscious that you're showing the child your palms and the inside of your arms hanging by your body. This is a completely neutral display that will subconsciously send the messages to the limbic system that they are not in danger. A lot of our children who live at home with the challenges of dysfunctional families or abuse, they are going to be really easily triggered back into their trauma and further out of their window of tolerance by somebody towering over them, by somebody with a really aggressive facial expression and aggressive tone, by quite literally backing a child into a corner. Be really aware of doing that. Make sure that they have enough space around them to feel free, and make sure that they have a view of the door, that they can see their exit routes so that they don't feel trapped, because that is further going to intensify any trauma triggers. Keeping your voice calm, keeping your voice in a kind of sing-songy tone of voice is proven to calm and regulate the nervous system and bring our children back in. Now, I'm not saying if you're going to tell a child off because they've done something that's really broken the boundaries and broken the rules and they need to have realised this. I'm not suggesting you're going to start singing to them. But before we can even begin to deal with the boundaries, remember the brain of the child. So they flip their lid. Their thinking brain isn't connected to their emotional brain. They're running solely on the emotional brain and the survival brain. So you're not going to be able to get any sense out of them, and they're not going to get any sense out of you, because their auditory processing centres, their speech centres, their thinking, their reflection, their problem solving, their reasoning is all in this part of the brain that is currently not working. So in order to get to that stage, we need to calm and regulate them in order for the thinking brain to connect back. So if we go in all guns blazing with a really stern voice, a really stern face, that kind of, you know what I mean by the kind of typical teacher telling off, and the way that we use the power in our voice and that we underline certain words by putting more power in them. This isn't going to achieve anything right now. other than further pushing that child out of their window of tolerance. So get down on their level, neutral, calm tone of voice, open body language. This is going to start to regulate them. It's going to start making their heartbeat slower, their breathing will slow down, and if you consciously focus on your breathing, you will even more regulate them getting into your breathing pattern. It's going to make their stress levels start to go down a bit in order for their thinking brain to kick in. And then once you have them in this regulated, calm state, you'll be able to take the next step. Avoid power struggle. I know it's really difficult as a teacher when you've got 30 children in your class, perhaps more as we return from lockdown, and there's a really challenging child that is making something extremely difficult, and you have all the other children to consider. I do know how frustrating that is, but we need to try to rise above that and not get caught in a power struggle with a child that doesn't know how to be any other way. Avoid getting hung up over secondary behaviours, and by that I mean just focus on the primary behaviour that has drawn this all to a head anyway. So for instance, if a child has been really disruptive and reactive in class and they've kicked a chair over, you're going to be focusing right now on regulating that child and then calming them into thinking about what has happened and why they got to the position where they kicked over a chair. If while they're talking to you, they are kind of talking in a rude manner like that, don't get caught up in that part of it, because it's just making it bigger and you're going way off track and the whole thing becomes way off track. And we get to the point where we don't even know what we're trying to focus on. So just focus at the primary behaviour, none of the secondary behaviour. But these points are all about general communication. It's not just about when we're dealing with incidences. Do not insist that they look at you whilst you're talking to them. This is quite a traditional thing that we expect of people, that if I'm talking to you, you need to listen, and by doing that, I need to see that you're looking at me. We know that children don't always listen when they're looking at someone. That gaze can be so intense, it actually triggers the emotional brain and the lid flips again. So actually, it's not doing any of us any favours. We also know that children can listen better when they're not looking and when they're fidgeting. For a lot of children, if they're kinesthetic learners, they're going to need to have that slight movement and that freedom of gaze in order to focus on their listening. If a child experiences deep sense of shame and guilt from previous trauma, it's just too much to look at you. So the very fact that they're with you and that you are doing everything you need to calm and regulate them, just trust in that they are listening and that you don't need to enforce this dominance and power struggle of gaze. If you're in a situation where you don't have the means to listen because of all your other duties and your responsibilities at that time, particularly if a child is trying to say something to you, they've come to you, do feel free to say to them, look, I really want to hear what you've got to tell me, but I want to make sure I can listen properly, and I can't do that right now. So can you hold it, write it down if you need to remember, and I'll be able to listen to you properly at lunchtime. Make sure that the child knows how important it is that you hear everything that they have to say. So those are the basics. Just reminding yourself of them can be really good practice because it is easy to forget. So active listening is when we give 100% focus to the person that we are communicating with. Our whole bodies are listening to them. So our body is going to be turned towards that person. Our body language is going to be open. We're going to lean slightly in so that they can see that we're all ears. We're hanging on every word that they say. We're not going to be scanning the room. If you are in charge of a whole class and it's just you there and you're trying to communicate with this child, then say to them, I am listening to you, but every now and then I'm going to have to just keep checking and making sure everyone else is okay, but I am listening to you. Okay. If you don't have to be doing that, just keep your eyes just on their eyes. even if they're not looking at you. Because every time that they do look up, they will see that your gaze is upon them, that every ounce of your being is invested in right that moment, listening to them. You might also have heard of reflective listening. Now, reflective listening is when we are showing the child that we have heard what they've said by repeating back some of the words and the phrasings that they've used. Whether we paraphrase or we use exact words, we're showing the child that not only are we listening, but we have heard them. And it can make a child feel really valued. So a child might say to you, I'm feeling really upset today. I can't stop thinking about my granddad that died and it's making me feel really sick. So you might respond, oh, you're feeling so sick today, you just can't stop thinking about your granddad. You're using their own words. They feel really heard and valued. But I'm going to bring a caution in here. We can get trapped into a reflective listening pattern where we just parrot what the child has told us, that it just doesn't do anything. It makes the child feel quite disconnected, can make them feel a bit uncomfortable, and it doesn't necessarily show that there is any empathy behind it. So the best practice is to engage in empathetic listening. Empathetic listening is when you're bringing in a huge amount of empathy and you're expanding on language that they've used to convey that you really understand the depth of their pain. So an empathetic response to that phrase, I can't stop thinking about my granddad, it's making me feel really sick. Oh, that sounds so difficult to be thinking all the time about your granddad and you just can't concentrate. How painful for you. You're reflecting, you're showing you've heard and valued, but you're bringing in the depth that you need to show that child, I get it and I understand how difficult this is for you. An unempathetic response to that would be, oh, that must feel really sad. Whilst you are acknowledging an emotion, sad just doesn't have the depth of feeling required to think about how that child is right now. It's actually what it is they're experiencing in that moment in time. So empathetic listening is similar to reflective listening, but you're bringing in empathy and you're really helping that child feel heard, but on an emotional level. Empathetic listening doesn't try to fix a child's problem by telling them what it is that they need to do. So, an example, I'm feeling really sad today. I can't stop thinking about my granddad and I feel really sick. Oh, that's really sad. Why don't you go and play with your friends? That will cheer you up. That's not going to cheer them up. All it's going to serve to do is to mean that they don't feel they can trust you with their emotions, because you weren't able to connect empathetically and you weren't able to just be with them in that pain. By trying to distract, by trying to fix, it minimizes the child's suffering, but it also means they don't feel that they can come to you for that support. And that means they're missing all those opportunities for the psychological and physiological healing that we know that relationships can bring. So any phrases that might come into your head, just check before you say them. Obviously, this is something that is a practiced skill, so you are going to say the wrong things sometimes, and that's fine. Just acknowledge, do you know what, I think what I just said probably wasn't very helpful, and then move on to the empathetic response. So anytime you catch yourself with phrases like, well, have you thought of, or what you need to do is, or why don't you, they are the phrases to stay away from. So anytime that's coming into your head, recognize that and then back off and think, well, what can I say to just acknowledge that I'm here with them. I acknowledge and I recognize the depth of their feeling, but I'm going to stay with them in it. We also need to be really wary about making interpretations based on our own experiences or what we think the child might be feeling. We have to listen really carefully to what it is that they have told us. So we wouldn't necessarily say, wow, you must be feeling really angry about that, unless they themselves have given us lots of other cues that it is anger that they're feeling. So we can say, you seem like you've got some really big feelings about that. Big feelings encompasses everything, and we're not naming and labeling incorrectly, and we're still giving the child the chance to trust us and to come and explore it further. When we shut down communication prematurely, whether it's because we've got our body language, our facial expression, our tone of voice, we've become domineering and empowering, we've trapped a child in a corner, both physically and psychologically, because we're caught in a power struggle. When we're just reflective listening and parroting, and we're not bringing in the empathy, or when we're labeling and interpreting incorrectly, we're not being that healing relationship that we know helps a child's brain start to heal and helps them begin to make sense of their experiences. When it comes to communicating with children, it's really good to remember P.A.C.E, which I know a lot of schools in the Echo Trust are already familiar with. This was a concept designed by Dr. Daniel Hughes, and it stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And when we approach children with this in mind, we are going to be able to bring those healing components of our relationship. And we're going to be able to do it in a way that is really positive and just makes sense to the child. So when we're playful, we can sometimes diffuse situations, but we can bring that child back in. We can connect with them before they go way off out of their window of tolerance. So if a child has been quite rude to you and said something in a tone of voice, or actually the words that they've said have been quite rude, instead of going straight in for the discipline and straight in about the behaviour, remember, okay, we can try and bring them back to their window of tolerance and do it in a playful approach first. So you might say something like, wow, do you want to say that with a bit more feeling? Or, why don't you tell me how you really feel? And with a smile and that playfulness, you can get it just on the cusp before it turns too much. It is something to be slightly careful of, because it can be misconstrued by some children and it could take it off in the other direction. We can help just lighten everything, and then we can accept how they're feeling, which is the next stage. So accepting without judging, without bringing any limitations in, just accepting how they're feeling. So continuing with this example, wow, why don't you tell me how you really feel? And then a bit calmer, more quieter, getting down on their level, open body language. Looks like you've got some really big feelings today. I'm wondering how you're feeling right now. You're accepting that there's some big feelings, that these are the reason why this incident has just occurred, and you're just going to accept it. And then that child might be willing just then to express to you, yeah, I am actually, and express to you what's going on. Or it might be that just having that acceptance is giving them time to pause, giving them time to breathe and begin to regulate. And then you can move on to curiosity. I'd really like to understand what's going on for you today. It seems like it's really hard for you, and I'd really like to be able to help you. You're showing a real genuine curiosity about what it is that's making them behave in the way that they are, or whether that's a withdrawal behaviour or a reactive behaviour. It could be then that you also need to lay a limitation, a boundary. So you've playfully connected with them, you've accepted how they're feeling, and within that you can be curious. I'd really like to understand what's going on for you today, because it's not okay to push Dylan, and we know that's against the class rules. So I'd really like to understand what's making you have such big feelings today. And then we can move on to curiosity. So we're trying to convey to the child a really deep desire to understand what's going on for them, to acknowledge that they're having a really hard time, accept that these big behaviours are there, these big feelings are there, and be curious as to why. So you might say something like, I'd really like to understand what's going on for you today. I'm wondering how it's feeling right now, being here. I wonder how you felt when X said that about your mum. Can you help me understand what was going on for you before that just happened? We're acknowledging that they're in distress. We're accepting how they're feeling without running away or trying to fix it, and we're showing curiosity about why. All these things are immediately going to start to regulate our child and bring them back into the window of tolerance. And then we can show the E, the empathy. And this is really going to bring them right back into that zone. It's going to bring the words, it's going to connect them to the emotions, to help them begin to make sense of them. And it's going to start releasing the feel-good chemicals in the brain from experiencing empathy from a warm adult. Of a child who is really reluctant to leave their mum and come into the playground and to start the school day. So we could forcibly remove them from their parents and bring them really distressed physically into the school. Well, that's just sent them out of their window of tolerance, and they're completely unconnected and misattuned, and they don't trust us because we've just removed them from their safe base. So what we can do is really playfully, so getting down on their level, all the steps we've discussed so far about our body and how we're conveying and communicating, and just playfully say, do you know what, I hear you so hard, you're telling me I don't want to go. That's connecting on a playful level. And then accepting how they're feeling. It's just so hard for you this morning. You just don't want to say goodbye to your mum. And then bring in some curiosity. Can you help me understand how you're feeling today? Maybe we can go in and we can do some drawing. You can show me how you're feeling. So I'd really like to help. And then bring in the empathy. It's so scary for you since your granddad died. Feels like the whole world has got mixed up, and it's just too much to leave your mum right now. But I promise I will keep you safe today, and I'm going to look after you. That's such a different approach to becoming authoritarian and physically removing a child and making them come into school. But the impact is so different. One pushes the child further out of their window of tolerance, and one brings their child back in. It starts to regulate their systems, it starts to heal, and it starts to release the feel-good hormones. So the next step to this would be then taking the child in to read a therapeutic story with them, and then maybe taking them safely back to class, or doing some creative expression from that, to looking at some of the emotions cards, to doing a little job, spending some one-on-one time together with that child. Working with therapeutic stories is a great way to calm and connect with a child, because you're in that zone, you're regulating, you're attuning, and you're exploring really big, difficult feelings through metaphor, and that creates a sense of safety and distance, and that means the child is more able to explore it with you and to make sense of what's happening because of that safety and that distance. Another way to really help children to express themselves, to really begin to come to you and express their emotions, and for you to help them make sense of them, is what's called big empathy drawing. Now, this is something designed by Dr. Margot Sunderland, and I only came across it at the back end of 2019. I have used it many times in my work since, with fantastic results, and I've also used it a lot as a parent. Now, you can either prepare one, very short sketchy drawing on a piece of paper, or it could be as a means to start a conversation. So for the child that doesn't want to come into school, that is really struggling, you've used P.A.C.E to be able to separate them from their mum. They've come into school, you might have read a therapeutic story with them, and now you're going to do a big empathy drawing. So a large piece of paper works best, and then draw a few different emotions. Now, these can be emojis, they can just be shapes and scribbles. You don't have to be an artist, so don't even stop and think about your abilities. It's about conveying emotion and that you understand a child. So you might draw 4 different emotions: scared, frustrated, angry, alone. And you can write those down and just say, I'm wondering if you're feeling any of these today. I know sometimes when children are feeling really upset, they might be feeling one of these. And you can pass the pen to the child and say, if you want to tick if I'm right, and if I've got it completely wrong, maybe you could draw for me how you're feeling. You're creating a dialogue that doesn't involve words and that can visually really connect very, very quickly. It might be that you then start a conversation from this, and you can write down key words, key phrases, you can illustrate little points that really underscore that for the child, the things that you feel that they need to hear that you've said. But again, it's bringing conversations on. And then you can stop and say, I really want to make sure that I've heard you correctly and I've got this right, and summarize and take them back through that picture. One of the children that I did it with was just absolutely astonished, and she said, this is the first time I think anyone has ever heard me before. They are so powerful, and it gives you the opportunity to get it wrong, to suggest things that aren't right without putting it on the child and saying, this is how I think you're feeling. It's, I wonder if any of these connect with how you're feeling, and giving them the opportunity to really express what it is that they are feeling themselves. Some children are not able to come to us with their big feelings right away. Even when we're there trying to support them, they might not feel that they can express them. So some children will test us in other ways first to see how we handle the small stuff. Now, this might be a child coming to show us a little scrape on their knee. They might come to tell us that something happened in the playground. And depending on how we respond to this is whether they feel they can trust us. So we get a lot of children showing us scraped knees and things, but it doesn't really matter if there's nothing bigger than they had a scraped knee. But if we respond to each of them as if it's important, we're letting the child know that their experiences are important. It's often quite a tempting thing to say, oh, it's only a little graze, you'll be fine, go on, off you go. But if that was a child that was coming to test us, we failed that first test. It doesn't take any more effort to just show a bit of empathy and say, oh, that looks like it was painful. How did that happen? Our approach can mean the world of difference. Sometimes if we ignore these things, they can lead on to bigger things. They can even lead on to disclosures. And we've shut that child down, we've silenced them, and we've taken that voice away. Some children just find it really hard to talk about themselves. So when we ask them to show us through drawing, when we're showing curiosity, can you help me understand? Can you draw for me how you're feeling? Or when we're doing big empathy drawings, we're able to then talk to the things in the pictures so that the child can answer, but we're not directing it at them. So use that. If a child has drawn a picture, maybe delve into it, show some empathy to the things in the picture, and it will be able to help them express a lot more. As we've mentioned in previous videos, using mental state talk throughout the day, really naturally and informally, can really help children to have the words to then come and talk to you about the things they need to, whereas before they might not have had a language, they might not have had an emotional vocabulary. When a child does open up to you and expresses how they feel, congratulate them on being brave. Let them know how wonderful it is that you were able to talk about your feelings, that some grown-ups never learn to do that. And because they've been able to do that, it's going to make them feel so much better. Normalise their feelings. If it's something that you know everyone's experiencing, let them know that. Let them know it's absolutely fine to feel this way when something really stressful has happened, and well done for talking to me about it. When a child is showing a big amount of distress, whether they have had a really difficult playtime, they're being reactive, or whether they're just really shut down and maybe quietly crying, whatever it is, it's so important for us to remember that we are the adults and we are in charge. So many children don't know what they need. They don't know what they want. The same as us. When we're in distress, when somebody says, what do you need? What can I do? you don't know. For one, you can't think because your thinking brain shut down, but also often we just don't know. But we as adults know that what they need is a calming, empathetic relationship and that moment with an adult to regulate them. So even if they're saying, I just want to be on my own, you can say to them, I hear you, you just want to be on your own, but right now I'm not going to leave you with all these difficult feelings. Of course, a really important thing to flag up is confidentiality and safeguarding. Most children are just going to be talking to us about how they feel and the emotions that they've been experiencing, but there is always a chance that a child is going to disclose something to you in these relationships. So do make sure you are really clear on school's safeguarding policy. Be brave, be the anchor for that child in their storm. Show them that you can hold their emotions, that you can be there, that you're not judging them, you're accepting them, you're curious, you're empathetic. Use big empathy drawings when you really need to get into the nitty-gritty of things. And just remember how important you just being there and listening is.